So I'm gonna crack on. So really pleased to be joined today by Richard Nisbet, who's development officer with GoodMoves. So those of you who have, I guess, often looked for jobs in the sector, it's certainly one of the sites that we often go to. But I'm also delighted to be joined by Jane from AAI. Can't say that too quick, can you, Jane? You're probably much better than me. I should slow down. AAI Employability. And again, I know that Social Enterprise Scotland have worked with you recently or with your organisation around recruitment. So we know there's going to be lots of really useful tips. And I can tell you, I've seen Richard's presentation already. So there's some really interesting stats coming out, I think, of looking at recruitment and some bits that I think won't be a surprise to those of us who've been around the sector for some time in terms of when people recruit in our sector. But I'm not going to steal Richard's thunder. He's probably thinking, oh God, she's saying everything in my slides.
Sorry.
So I'm not going to do that. But and I'll just hand straight over to you, Richard. So I think we should be all good for you to do the slide share, and over to you, and then we'll do the usual style. Once Richard's done, I'll introduce Jane, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. If you've got any questions as we're going through today's presentation, please use the chat. We've got two experts on the session today, so you know it's a real chance to ask some questions, get some tips and get some advice. So whether you're recruiting or indeed looking for work and career development in the third sector, then today is your opportunity. So thank you very much, and over to you, Richard.
Well, thanks for that, Naomi. I'm going to introduce myself briefly, and my name is Richard Nisbet. I work for Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations as the GoodMoves Development Officer. I'm going to talk a little bit today about GoodMoves, firstly, also the type of jobs that are available in the sector, and then a little bit about the type of underlying trends that we've seen in the last year. And some interesting stats, as Naomi said there, about what we see happening in terms of recruitment. So I'll just start off here with GoodMoves, just in case you haven't seen the website. GoodMoves was a website that we created in 2003. It had the twin aims of looking to promote the sector to job seekers who didn't work in the sector and try and drive fresh talent, as well as save the third sector money. And we've been quite successful in doing that. We currently have 80,000 unique users a month. We advertise in a year more than 3,500 jobs across the whole breadth of the sector for more than 1,200 organisations. So it's a really successful website, and I think we do a reasonable job helping the sector. This slide here is some information that SCVO has on where jobs are in the sector. So the number of jobs in the sector is estimated to be 107,000, and you can see here from this slide the breakdown of where they are. You can see the kind of domination or the large element of social care jobs in the sector. Nearly 50,000 of those jobs are in social care. We have housing jobs at 15,000, culture and sport 11,000 jobs, health 10,000, umbrella bodies nearly 1,000, religious organisations with nearly 500, law and advocacy have nearly 3,000 jobs. So this slide again, it's quite a useful breakdown of where you would expect to find jobs in the sector. Again, just to emphasise that, the top 15 employers in the sector, you'll recognise most of these organisations, large social care organisations, housing associations, and some large health charities as well. But it's just kind of emphasising the previous slide, where you would expect to find jobs and careers in the sector. What kind of jobs are there? There's a wide variety of jobs in the sector, not just the traditional ones that you would expect to see from this list. You'll see fundraising, youth work, volunteering, support work, kind of advocacy, care work on this list, but also kind of new stuff like business development, IT, and particularly something that we're seeing a lot of just now in terms of public relations or communications officer jobs. That's kind of a growing area on the site. So, and you also see retail in there as well, which is an emerging one for us. So just moving on again. What does staff like? This is something that I speak about a lot when I go to careers fairs, is trying to say that there's job satisfaction within the third sector. And it's really good to say that and to promote that as being the case, but also you need to check occasionally that what you're saying is true and accurate. So SCVO conducted a survey of people who worked in the third sector, and this is the feedback that they got. 40% of people who worked in the third sector feel that they're making a real difference to people and communities. 31%, it's about the people that they support. 22% are colleagues and working in a great team. 20% the variety of work, no 2 days are the same, not stuck in an office, and new projects. 16% the innovation, challenging old thinking, developing new ideas and being creative. Again, that 15% autonomy, independence to be flexible, manage your own workload and try out new ideas, and 15% the ethos of the sector. Now, I definitely recognise that that's consistent with my experience of the sector, and I expect that you do too. So moving on to pay, which is important as much as we'd all like it not to be. Pay rates may be less than the going rate in some sectors, particularly those which rely on donations, e.g. animal and environment charities, and that will be particularly relevant with issues just now with fundraising. However, many third sector organisations aim to pay public sector rates using the SGC scales as a kind of benchmark. Salaries tend to be fairer than the private sector, with less difference between those at the top and the bottom. And one way that some organisations do that is by using a ratio. I know SCVO recommended a ratio of 5:1, and that compares very favourably with what you can see in the private sector. Occasionally it's 20:1 and above that. I'm just going to run through some standard salaries here that we have information from GoodMoves. So a typical starting salary for a policy officer is around 27,000 in a large organisation, 26,000 in a smaller one. A typical starting salary for a development officer is around 25,000, rising to 27,000 after a year or two. Typical starting salary for a communications, marketing, social media officer is around 26,000. Again, that's a job role that we've seen quite a lot of an increase on in GoodMoves. Typical starting salary for a fundraising officer is around 25,000, but with experience that can rise to 30 to 40,000. So you can see quite a variation there in the fundraising one, depending on experience as well. So post-lockdown impact, I think this is quite an interesting thing to see in relation to how the sector reacted, how the third sector reacted to lockdown, and kind of how it impacted on and we'll do that through looking at how it impacted on GoodMoves advertising. So you can see here that when we hit March, there was a significant trail off in the number of jobs in the year in 2020 on the yellow line in comparison to what we would normally see on the blue line. And then gradually, as the sector adapted to the new working conditions, you can see it increased again continuously all the way up to September, October, where we returned to what we would term normal levels of advertising. This is really interesting for a couple of things, a couple of points that I would make about this. One, I was interested to see, was this a broad recovery, or were there specific areas that were coming back quicker than others? And were salaries any different? And interestingly, I'll answer the second point in the next slide, but interestingly, it was a broad recovery. There wasn't any real surge in one particular type of field over another. It was just a broad recovery in the certainly in the jobs that we were advertising. That's what the data was showing, and also that this was much faster than what you saw in kind of the wider economy, where there's only been a return to normal levels of advertising in the last couple of months. So that trend is really interesting in a couple of ways. I'll move on to the next slide. Average salary in 2020 in GoodMoves was 28,456, an increase of 3% on 2019. Again, that's actually consistent with the wider economy. So that's an interesting stat there, that the increase in salary was consistent with the wider economy and not less than the wider economy. 48% of jobs in GoodMoves in 2020 were for salaries under 25k. In 2019, it was 53%. When I did the research into that, I was a wee bit concerned that what actually was happening was that there was less entry-level positions coming on the site. But actually, looking at the data a bit more, what you're seeing is that this is actually part of just a general trend, and it's not actually a reduction in the percentage of entry-level positions. on the site. Average salary of a job advertised in Scotland is 31,353. Got that data is from Adzuna, the large jobs aggregator, and the ONS who work together publishing that information. So that kind of reinforces what we were speaking about there in relation to the salary paying slightly less than other parts of the sector paying slightly less than other parts of the economy, but still a pretty decent salary. Post-lockdown impact. We spoke to both our customers and also people who were applying for posts, and we found obviously the first thing that happened was that they were moving to Zoom and remote interviewing. The second bit that we found was that, interestingly, candidates and job advertisers were finding that interviews were actually better in terms of the performance of candidates. And there was a number of reasons given for this, but the primary one seems to be that candidates were more relaxed in their home environment, and so therefore were given, better and fuller responses to the questions. And then the other thing that came out of it that was quite interesting was that candidates were applying out with their normal commute distance applying due to remote working. Obviously, that's an interesting thing in terms of increased reach of jobs. So next, remote working and flexible working. So we saw here some interesting trends. So we've seen a 10% increase in GoodMoves and jobs with flexible working hours. This is starting from a low base, but it's definitely a trend that we think is coming, and it'll be part of the change in terms and conditions as we come out of lockdown. Employers recognising that there's not necessarily the need for your standard 9 to 5 working hours. They can still get the same productivity for some jobs and roles from working more flexible working hours. And also most organisations are currently advertising roles as home working. And what we're expecting to see here is a kind of blended return to work where appropriate. Now, the sector's traditionally very good with terms and conditions, but that will mean kind of looking at things like, if it's going to become a more permanent fixture, you need to think about things like insurance, as well as costing of job equipment from working from home, laptops, chairs, and desks, and also who's paying for additional expenses like electricity, heating, etc. So it's another trend to watch and keep an eye on in job adverts. Skills for Work portal. This is a new thing that's been developed by SCVO. It's not actually specifically related to recruitment, but I thought I would take a chance here to do a bit of promotion for it. It's been developed in association with the Open University in partnership with the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations and 32 local authorities. The portal aims to give young people the skills they need to enter the world of work, with a particular focus on the voluntary sector as a career path. Just so that you're aware, it's not just young people who can use this portal and get access to the training that's available on it. Over 30 courses in the portal offer workplace skills, including employability, leadership, communication, and digital skills. The courses range 2 hours to 24 hours of training, also include skills for life, such as managing money, and specific modules for those interested in working in the voluntary sector. So this is a really new thing that we're launching. And again, a lot of third sector organisations struggle with training budgets. So we think it will be a really useful tool for the sector, and something that I think a lot of people will be interested in. And if you're interested in further information on this, people to contact would be my colleague Michael Hollinger. Got his details there if you're interested in finding out more information about it. And that's the end of my talk.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Rattled through that quite quickly.
No, that's good. Like I said, there was some really interesting stats, and I'm sure we'll come back to those when we move into the Q&A, because I'd certainly got a few questions I've noted down myself. And so, again, I'd started to put comments in about training and development, so it was good to see those slides in about the skills link at the end. I'm going to ask if you might stop sharing your slides, and I'm going to bring on my next speaker. Perfect. Thank you, Richard. So delighted now to also welcome Jane. So Jane joins us from AAI Employability. I said it a bit slower that time. It was a bit easier, Jane. And just, we're not doing slides, I don't think, Jane, but just delighted to kind of hear your take really on, I guess, careers and development and recruitment within this sector. So absolutely. I'll hand over to you and then we'll come into our Q&A at the end. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much, Richard. That was really interesting stats. And secondly, for showing me up for not having slides. However, so I just want to have a general kind of overview. My position is talent engagement lead. So I've worked with AAI for the last 8 years on a contract basis. So I've been doing all the sifting of CVs and that side of the recruitment. I've now been taken on a permanent basis. So I'm much more involved in some of the projects that I was maybe at the tail end of. AAI Employability started off as adopt an intern. So primarily looking at getting graduates into work, which is something that we're still focused on, but we have definitely broadened the whole umbrella, and it all comes under AAI Employability. So for this, obviously particular subject, we've always found that from the levels of people applying, particularly from the graduates, that's something that people are really genuinely interested in. There seems to be, there's a certain person who wants to work within the third sector, so that's always great. Third sector employers, we always find to have a different attitude. They're not chasing the profit, they're chasing more the social outcomes, sustainability, and the social value outcomes that really matter to them, and in turn that's appealing for a certain amount of candidates anyway. There's a different atmosphere in the workplace, which, as we know, as Richard touched upon as well, is somewhat remote at the moment, but has really made it a level for a lot of people. So, and with that has come the flexibility of working hours. We found this coming in as well, is that some companies are looking to build up, their employees, maybe not entirely sure how they need them to be, or where they need them to be, or when they need them to be. So sometimes this flexibility and remote working and different hours can sometimes help to develop the company as it possibly stands and make it to what it might become. So the employers obviously feel deeply passionate about their companies, their projects, and this can also work with people coming in to work with that organisation who possibly share their values, who are interested in doing project work. So there's an equal balance of maybe when the funding isn't there, or there's a certain amount of funding there are always plenty of people who are available to come in because they feel so enthused by whatever that project or that organisation might be. So for the candidates themselves, being involved in a third sector organisation, there's a real deep-seated feeling of achievement and purpose, and something we hear a lot, especially when I'm telephone interviewing candidates, is they really want to be part of something that's giving back, and it comes across with real genuine feeling and enthusiasm, which is it's great to hear, and it's lovely to therefore pass that on to the company you're working with, because you can show and demonstrate that there's a real level of enthusiasm, and that's important, especially when it's your baby, So as a social enterprise ourselves, we do attract a lot of third sector organisations who like our ethical, recruitment measures and the diversity of candidates that we can offer. We do a number of projects as well. So we've done some diversity inclusion. We've also done with people from different, ethnic minorities, all sorts of different things, different, physical abilities. And we're finding that this is such a purposeful thing for both the candidate, and employee, that everybody has something different to bring and something different to give. So it just adds to the mixture and the culture of that particular, company. So Richard touched upon this as well. money can always be an issue, and sometimes the salaries, you know, aren't so much of an equivalent as maybe would be offered. But we do find that the people who are interested in working within these roles, that the ethics and the meaning behind it can supersede what they're interested in. And we often find a lot of these candidates already being involved in voluntary projects, you know, that are still involved in voluntary projects when they might take on this position. So it's a different type of person who does that, you know. So it's a really interesting thing, and the opportunities are coming in very different, you know, organisations. So challenges, pay, as we've mentioned, if you're looking for, you know, the big pay and the bonuses and the potential winning a holiday, etc., this is not the route to go. A lot of people think that it might be an avenue they want to go down, but also a lot of people have worked in the public sector and thought, do you know, this isn't for me. I want to go and work somewhere where what I do and what I contribute, you know, really matters. So the impact of the last year for everybody has been, I think we've all used the word strange, difficult, trying, emotional, you know, many other things. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'll ever put a pair of jeans on again. It's never been possible. But these services are needed, you know, more than ever. Some have been supported by, you know, specialist COVID funding, which it can never be, you know, be a bad thing to the government. And there are different trusts who have certain pockets of funding, and sometimes it's just having the ability to find that. It's difficult to see what the outcome will be, but I think, you know, broadly speaking, what you can, from an employer's point of view, if you're looking for somebody but you're not entirely sure what type of person or what job you're looking for them to do, so that can start off as a really broad spectrum. You maybe need somebody who can work in the accounts but also do a bit of marketing, but can perhaps do this. And from that, you'll sometimes find that job will evolve. The person will make it their own and add that real nugget to your business, which can really, you know, increase output. It can really make a difference to what you're trying to do. And that sometimes, you know, it works back the way. So you know where you need to be, not necessarily sure how you're going to get there, but the combination of the right person with the right attitude, with the right empathy, can be absolutely, you know, second to none. So their diversity of responsibilities can work in, you know, really well. So we're always really delighted to hear from really talented people, and having done this for such a long time, I'm always blown away by the people that we come across and what they've achieved. Sometimes we know with younger graduates what they've achieved in a really short time, how much they have to offer, but also returners. So this has given such a different scope for, you know, maybe somebody who's worked in public sector before, wants to come back, needs that flexibility. Money is not the be all and end all, wants to do something purposeful. We did a project recently with women returners from a ethnic background. It was incredibly rewarding, and working with third sector companies. So they had a 4-week placement. What a difference it made for both. It changed internal structures within the companies, and also gave that confidence to these returners that they actually can give something really brilliant. So it was altogether a really, you know, a rewarding project to be part of. So I'm happy to take any questions on anything, but that at the moment is what I'd like to offer.
Thank you so much, Jane. I've been noting more questions down, and I'm just going to post just into the chat. So if you have any questions about working in social enterprise, or indeed about recruiting people and how, you know, any top tips you'd like, we've got experts here. Now is your opportunity. So please do post any questions that you may have. And I want to come back to a few things that I've been kind of noting as we come down. And it's a topic, I mean, we've run a particular session, I guess, looking at perhaps issues around, oh, the word's gone out of my mind, but I'm thinking of minimum wage, I'm thinking of living wage. I was thinking of the universal basic income was actually the thing that we ran a webinar on. And I'm just wondering, I'm not going to go into that topic, don't worry. But I just thought, is there something that is really important for our sector to do in terms of really setting that agenda, do you think, around living wage? And, you know, we talk a lot about kind of, and it's come up in both presentations, that pay can sometimes be lower in our sector. And I was always quite surprised, even when I read the last social enterprise sector, that there were still some employers out there that were still using zero waste contracts within our sector, albeit a small number, but we still have that. Do we have a kind of duty to some degree to really be focusing where we can on living wage? But how do we balance that with the sense of we might be not for private profit, but for social enterprise sector, we are still trying to kind of make that profit margin to benefit our community. So how do we get that balance, and what would be the advice you might give to organisations out there in terms of, I guess, setting salaries at that very basic level? And I'll start with Jane and then perhaps bring Richard in.
What I'd like to say is, I mean, it's something that's obviously it's really important. You know, money is what makes the world go round. But as I think I mentioned, to some people it's not the absolute be all and end all. But yes, there does have to be an absolute minimum. Zero hour contracts is something that we wouldn't even discuss. It's not something that would come in. And I'll always advise, and I'm sure Richard will be the same, always advise when you're speaking to people, you know, to get the best out of the people, you need to offer the best that you can, the best that you can give. If that perhaps means that you only have a certain budget, then reduce the hours. You know, make sure that it's something that's workable, that they can do. Look at different funding to see what else you can get. Alternatively, we're looking at somebody just now who has funding for 6 months, but however that job transpires, they will put back into the company, which will contribute towards the company's success. And from that, there is an incentive for the salary to go higher. So there's lots of different ways of going about it, but from an ethical point of view, then we just can't entertain it.
Thank you, Jane. That was a pretty clear answer. Richard, and I'm going to pick up around sort of the additional benefits, because you touched on that in my next question. But Richard, just any thoughts around that kind of the minimum wage, living wage, 0 hours kind of approach? Is it something our sector should use at all? And how do we get that balance right? Because, you know, I would agree with Jane in that we do have that sense of duty to people. It's what we're all about.
Yeah, I think that you've basically answered the question in your question. You know, from a personal point of view, I don't think that the sector can justify, you know, effectively paying people wages that we accept aren't enough to live on. That's not, you just ethically you can't do that. So that it is trying to make sure, as Jane said, about spending what you can and making sure that is at least meeting the minimum wage. There are very, very few jobs on GoodMoves that don't meet that level. But you know, I think that as a sector, we can't be promoting it as being an ethical sector if we aren't paying the minimum wage. It's that simple. It's a personal point of view.
Yeah, and you know, and I know that for some businesses, I mean, I think when I looked at the stats, a number of them were down in the south of Scotland, which is where I stay, and we have hospitality businesses down here that do a lot of that. So you kind of think, oh, I can understand one reason why, but there's something in my gut that just tells me it's not how we should be supporting people. But thank you for your opinions on it.
There's an issue there about whether or not the minimum wage should be the living wage. I think that's more a societal decision that we have to make. And that's something for us all to push for.
Hey, I'm with you on that. If the living wage is higher than the minimum wage, then the minimum wage isn't what you need as a minimum to live on. I just don't get why we've got the two, personally. We all need a living wage, surely. I just want to come back and it's again perhaps just said I was going to talk about benefits, but someone's actually posted a question, and it's still on that ethical kind of line. And it's kind of a comment about, you know, do you support things like the Show the Salary campaign? And do you think that actually we see it a lot now, jobs advertised and it's competitive rates? Should we be doing that as a sector, or should we be really open about that?
Yeah, again, this is an ethical thing, and it is, you know, very, very few jobs are advertised on GoodMoves that don't display the salary. I personally believe that all salaries should be displayed. It helps with the recruitment to have an open salary on there. There are no justifications in my view for not showing the salary at all. It just doesn't make any sense to me why any organisation could justify that to themselves. It's very clear cut again to me. It's a clear cut answer.
Yeah, I mean, I often wonder who applies to jobs if you don't know what the salary is personally. But that's
part of the discrimination, is that they understand that. Anyway, I'm not preaching converted here.
Thank you. We always end up touching on ethical questions. We wouldn't be in our sector if we didn't. I don't think that's, you know, it comes back to a lot of what you said, and I can see, Jane, you were nodding pretty much all the way through there.
It slows down the process for a start. So, I mean, obviously, the likes of Richard said, we're the intermediaries. So the first question you're going to get asked is, what's the salary if it's not posted? So, but you've already probably had a conversation with the recruiter to say, you're not on a level playing field. You know, you're not reaching the right people. You know, you could get a whole lot of people, for example, applying for the wrong job, who are desperately trying to get something, and their support, you know, they could be looking elsewhere that could be like supported in a different manner, and not applying for a job that's not right for them, you know, and think, oh well, if we don't know a salary, maybe it's okay for me. It's absolutely fundamentally not right. You're not going to capture the right people, and everyone needs to know that it's right for them. And I think things have changed from over the years. It's not just about sitting in front of an employer and being the right person. It's about them being the right company for you to be associated with. So, and I think that all goes part and parcel.
Yeah, so I'm aware. Again, things that you see in general job sites, you know, elements of job sites that hide particular parts of salaries in order to make sure that, you know, the top grade isn't seen and stuff. And you're like, why would you do that? I can't personally conceive of a legitimate reason for doing it, but they do. There's, and it's clearly a discriminatory thing. So people who are job seeking, as Jane says, are applying for the wrong jobs. They're not fully aware of all the information, and it just doesn't make any sense to me at all why anybody would do that. And charities should be able to, and if there's a fear around them, maybe talking about, maybe some salaries are very high and they don't want, or perceived to be high, and they don't want that in the public domain. That's even a worse argument in my mind, because you have to be able to, as a charity, be open and honest, or a third sector organisation, with everything that you're doing. You shouldn't be afraid to justify, to show anything to do with how you're employing your staff, or anything around that.
Totally agree.
Yeah, no, I think transparency is key in our sector. I think it's really important we do that. And actually, we have a job not just to be doing that through the projects we lead, but actually we're trying to lead in my mind, the sector's trying to lead a different way of doing business and recruitment, as well as our own recruitment.
And just to be clear, that we actively encourage and cajole as much as possible any organisation that doesn't want to display the full salary to do so. It's in our view, it's not in their interest to do that.
Thank you. Couldn't be clearer. So if you're looking to do a job ad without a salary, think again, I guess, is the key thing that you're hearing today from our panel. I want to touch, and again, it comes back to this point to some degree about pay. And I guess, you know, we've touched on the fact that pay can often be lower in our sector. But how do we make sure that in trying to compete for the best people, and I think, you know, whether that's getting people to move from one sector into ours to bring skills that our organisations need, or just making sure that we've got good career progression for people within our sector, how can we make sure that we compete through some of those additional benefits? What have perhaps been some of the most interesting additional benefits you've seen, kind of people? Is it holidays? Is it flexibility? What do you think are the key things that people could bring into that if they can't compete on the salary line on its own?
again, this is something that we touched on. It's about the ability. I mean, I did a slide there about what people find beneficial about working in the sector, and it is that, you know, the sense of achievement of doing something constructive, but also the scope and the freedom that you're given within your role, although maybe perhaps that's becoming a lot less. But what you find is that in general within the third sector, there's a bit more scope for people to develop the job role that they're doing. So that seems to be the feedback that we receive. So that would be one of the things that I would push hard, is that flexibility within a role to progress. Touching on it, but the flip side of that is the negative, the entry level positions, where there isn't, because of the way the sector's funded, it can be more difficult for some organisations to have those entry level career progressions. It's much more come in and do the job fully formed and then progress.
Yeah, and often, you know, again, I'm speaking from personal experience, it's that you go in to do one job and you actually suddenly find you're probably doing the job that's already at the next level before you're at the next level in terms of pay. And I think it's understanding, and I often talk in my own personal experience. I once had a boss who I ended up doing quite a lot of his work, and at times you could sit there and, God, it's really frustrating. And I took that as an opportunity to build my skills, build my development, and actually take on tasks that were perhaps beyond my current job role. And I think it's been inventive about how you do that, because we do have a sector where training budgets can be lower sometimes. So how is it that you can almost give people tasks from the next level job up before they do it, without taking advantage of people, but in order that you're trying to give them that next bit on the CV? And I wonder if there's just clever ways around training and development that we can do some of that people have got thoughts on.
Just going to add on from what Richard said when he's doing his slides, what do staff like? I've written that down because that is actually imperative, and I've written in block capitals job satisfaction. So I think that from a training perspective, because sometimes that's tricky. If it's a sole trader, for example, they've just started out, and as I touched on earlier, who do we need? I don't know. I need somebody who probably can do absolutely everything and telepathically just understand what I need to do. So sometimes it does take, you know, maybe, but it all comes back to the right person for the right organisation, and that training might just come from within themselves. It's learning external courses that would maybe like benefit them. That's, you know, because there's lots of opportunities. There's things on LinkedIn, for example, that you can do that you maybe want to build your skills up on. But sometimes finding just actually learning, you know, on the job is the way to do it.
And that's exactly what I was going to say, Jane, that bit at the end there, you know, what is this is going to sound like an existing, what is training? you know, the ability to be able to do something and fail but then learn from that and move on. That's essentially, you know, possibly the opportunity that you can give people.
Yeah,
it's a tricky one though, in terms of organisations not wanting to be as efficient as possible as well. It's that balance.
It's really tough, I think, in our sector, and it's great that there's those kind of free courses out there. But I think, again, there's lots of subsidised courses in our sector, whether that's leadership courses that people like the Academy run, or the stuff you were talking about with the Open University. But we've also, I think, got quite a strong peer-to-peer support approach within our sector. And I would always encourage people to utilise those kind of more mentor type roles, because they may not even exist in a formal system, but actually people in our sector tend to be incredibly helpful at helping you find the right person that could give you that bit of advice or would take on that mentoring role. So really, again, existential question, what is training? But, you know, really think, what is it that you need? And is there an inventive way you can get that, perhaps? I know, again, I always feel like I'm butting in with ideas on topics, so apologies, but I often used to say to people, sometimes if you think you want a certain job in a few years' time, send off or look at the job description and the person spec for that role now and work out what are the gaps that you currently don't meet, and they're the bits that you want to try and fill. So you might say, oh, that's a job I'd love in that organisation, but I'm not ready yet. Look at the job specs that are out there and then try and build that into your own training plan is often sometimes quite a useful way of understanding what employers want. I'm going to come back to another question rather than keep wittering on myself, because you're the experts, not me. You touched on it a little bit in terms of the diversity question. And again, we've just seen it come up, I think, quite strongly in the Social Enterprise Action Plan that's just come out, in terms of really, how do we ensure that we have a sector that is truly diverse, so that we haven't got people from, whether that's, and I'm using diverse not just in the protected characteristic sense, but people from all sorts of backgrounds really coming into our sector at all levels. So I think we're very good at running projects for people from all communities. Do we create enough job opportunities for people from all communities? And how do we make sure that we do? So are there any top tips around how we write jobs, where we advertise jobs? And Jane, I think you talked about the kind of getting women back into the workplace. So what were the top things you learned from that in terms of how you went around that project, so that you really did encourage people from different backgrounds to get jobs and careers?
It was interesting because from the start, so it started off with 30 women. So we went out usual social media channels. This is what we're going to do. It's going to be basically employability workshops. Come join. And it was very interesting to see from those who had their screens blank, no names up, no nothing, to over the weeks, you could see the confidence building. And but coming in from the other side as well, and I think I did mention it earlier, were the employers. So these are some really brilliantly talented women. And I'm not ashamed to say it was very emotional. It was really emotional. So different perspective and maybe a different understanding of what they could offer, and real low self-esteem. So to watch that increase week after week after week. So some of the ones whose face you hadn't seen, to all of a sudden their face being seen, to then actually speaking and conversing and contributing. Then there was a placement at the end. So the placements weren't particularly long, but in that 4 weeks, the change was phenomenal. They're not just within, the women themselves that were lucky enough to get a placement, but with the actual companies themselves. So they looked back at their policies, they look at their employment policies, they look at how they put things out. Very basic things, from just being that very typically British, when we think, I don't know how to say their name, so we just try and mumble through it, to just simple things like, well, just ask me, so real back to basics, level stuff. So there was been some real work done on, integration, on your qualifications, wherever you've come from. There is a comparison, but it's really about building up confidence and trying to educate as much as you can. And it's not a box ticking exercise. I think there's a lot of form filling of, what's your ethnic background. That's just trying to make sure that that's covered. It is about making it open to everybody, and partly that's up to us as well. It's about who we get the jobs out to. If you're going through somebody like us, it's about what groups you send it to, about how you encourage, people, how you maybe, like, people might have thought that this isn't for them. Well, it absolutely could be. There's no reason why not. We talked a lot about transferable skills, and realizing what transferable skills are. So that's a brief overview. That's a whole subject in itself.
Yeah, I know we've run one session before on diversity. I think we're even looking at doing much more on that in the next year, because you can't touch on diversity in 10 minutes. And actually, I'm with you. It can't just be this box ticking exercise. There's so much around it in terms of organisational culture and how people fit in. It's very broad, I think, in terms of bringing people in. Richard, in terms of your experience of how has GoodMoves tried to kind of get its, I guess, job pages out to a very diverse community?
Yeah, we try to use as many networks as possible and try and push out and reach as wide a community as possible. That's our aim. So any opportunity we can to promote as widely as possible is what we're trying to do. I totally agreed with everything that Jane was saying there. There was a couple of points. I think the big thing for me is it's also about organisations looking at themselves to make sure that they're welcoming to all communities. It's not just the advert, it's the sector as a whole, making sure it's perceived, not as welcoming to all areas of society as much as possible. and then the adverts should be easier from that point forward. If you've got that initial bit right, you know, then it's just a matter of getting the message out there, and people are aware that this is a sector that's welcoming. That was the only thing, and I totally agreed with everything Jane was saying, but that was all that I had really to add to that.
Yeah. No, there's so much I think we need to do, and it's a lot of that stuff that's just underlying and things that you take for granted, that sometimes you don't realise how it can keep people out rather than invite people in, and you're not deliberately doing that. But you know, I even think, you know, that thing of walking into a big conference, and if everyone else is in a suit and you're not, and they're all reading The Guardian or talking about politics, and you know, actually your interest is in something quite different. You know, how do we make sure that we can really feel like everyone is welcome in our sector? Because that to me is what we're all here for. So much broader, but we're not here to talk about that. At least not today. I just wanted to come back to some very practical stuff that's related to the kind of the recruitment side, I guess. And you know, people often end up writing a job description. I think we can have a tendency, particularly in small organisations, where we kind of we're almost looking for someone to come in with a magic wand and do everything. So how do we write a good job description that maintains its focus, but that doesn't try to bring in so much that actually maybe the job purpose is less clear, or that we're putting people off by simply having so much in there to cover it that people look and think, well, that's not possible in 40 hours a week. You know, what's the art of writing a good job description?
Well, again, you've almost answered that in your question there. but there is, I'm just going to tell my favourite thing about the sector is that there is that diversity to grow a role. And one of the things, it's a slightly off topic a little bit, but it is related to this, is that once that role's grown, then how does the organisation fill that role? So I used to see quite a lot of, and it's got better actually recently, your fundraising, gardening lecturer roles, where this wasn't a job, this was a person who'd left, and they were just trying to fill that person's job that they had grown and done things obviously with, and then they had left. So, but what you're seeing now is much more coordination, much more, it's about the structure of your organisation and making sure that you're consistent with the type of jobs that are available, so that you don't, even although you give people the opportunity to grow and expand their role, that you're still advertising a job that's consistent with what's in the job market. Does that make sense? So look at what other jobs are available in the area, look at their job descriptions, try and get a feel for that, but also marrying that with what you're looking for, and also succession planning and making sure that if somebody does leave, that if they've developed the role and they've done something that's unique to their personality, that perhaps that skill set is shared across the org. So it's a wider thing than just the job, if you see what I mean. It's more about how you manage the organisation, so that you don't have to fill that individual who's left doing the fundraising, gardening lecture. And then so does that answer your question?
No, it does, and I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it, because I think we can all fall into that, oh, you know, what did Richard used to do? We need to capture all of that, but actually what is it that the organisation needs? Yep. And how does that fit, so that we're not always recruiting the same kind of, I mean, not necessarily the same person, but the job tasks that we need. But
the important thing is that those skill sets are shared, and that not one person, if they go, then it's completely lost. That you've got a structure which incorporates that, and as you say, that you fill the role that you need, but the skill sets are also across. So it's wider than just the recruitment. It's about your management of the organisation, so that you don't end up in that situation.
Yes, totally agree. But I would just like to add to that blatantly, just come to AAI Employability and I'll do it for you. Nice.
Well, yes, and similarly, GoodMoves will help you do this as well. So
well, you know, you've got to be able to plug something, I guess. So that's
all
fine. That's all fine. That's part of trading and being a social enterprise. So we're not frightened of that here. It was a question just in terms of and I think, again, you touched on this a bit in presentations, but someone's just put in the Q&A, you know, do we tend to have a tendency perhaps sometimes to always fall into thinking we need a full-time post and a 5-day a week? And if we're restricted on salary, would we sometimes be better saying, well, actually, we know we've got and I'll, 20k. And we would get a better person for 4 days than trying to get someone for 5 days. What would your advice be around that? And then I want to just perhaps add on to that, just something about, we've also seen the challenges of organisations have grown, and I think that sense of how do we manage growth in our sector at the point when, I think you talked about your own experience, Jane. At first you were freelance and then you've got taken full on. And I'm this, I work freelance. So I tend to do that little bits of extra for people at the point when they haven't got the full-time salary role, but they need someone extra. So I'm going to perhaps pick on you to do the kind of bit about could you use freelancers rather than traditional recruitment to fill some of those kind of gaps. But just the question about the salary and the day rates first to Richard, and then I'll get Jane to do the one on
the first bit is actually understanding and being very honest with yourself about what you require in terms of the work. It's unfair to recruit someone to a part-time role, but actually it's a full-time role. So don't be doing that either. Be clear, is it actually possible to do it in this amount of time? And then if it is, then it is an option, but you need to be honest and realistic in your appraisal of the time scales that are involved. That's the main thing that I would say about that. I think it is a good idea to look at the flexible working, to look at whether or not you can reduce the times that are possible, but just make sure that it is actually a part-time role that you're advertising, and not a full-time role that you want to advertise as part-time to get a better candidate in, and then they turn up and it's actually a full-time role.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah, it's interesting because, and also what Richard said earlier about somebody leaving and you try to fill that person. Well, I am actually filling the person of that person that left. So interestingly, however, there has been a restructure internally about who else can do different things. So that's all worked out quite well. But the person who's left, I was working with anyway, on a contractual basis, which suited me absolutely fine. Personally suited me fine. I've got an 8 and a 9-year-old, so it worked in well with schooling. Sometimes I work late at night. This now works better for me personally. So my hours are 9:30 till 2:30, which are never 9:30 till 2:30. But have a bit of bargaining and say, I will take a couple of days off to compensate for that. And I do think organisations, because sometimes you may have, like, for example, some project work. So you're probably going to have some funding for that project work. So if you've got funding for it, realistically, if you take somebody else on a part-time basis, you need to work out how long it's going to take them to do it if they work on a part-time basis, and whether that's feasible or not for that to be handed in at that time. At that point, you can make that open. You can work either full-time flexibly, part-time flexibly, or this is the amount of money you will get to finish this job. So therefore the hours almost, are almost secondary, but I think everybody has pretty much gone past the 9 till 5, 8:30 till 6:30, which is very traditional, old school, recruitment. And it's very much more about working and what people want to do. You'll often find people who are applying for certain roles are involved in something else and are keen to still be involved in something else, or they have personal circumstances that between the hours of 9 and 5. So from a part-time basis, sometimes a lot of people will advertise if they're just starting, but they need somebody and they don't know what to do. Sometimes that discussion can be had at interview stage. I would never suggest leaving it as loose as that, but there's also this job share. There are various different ways of piecing things together. It doesn't all need to be, this is the salary, these are the hours, and we need you at your desk at this time. No longer is remote working considered a doobie day. We're all doing our bit. Let's not get this wrong. My towels are out in the line. But we're all doing what we're supposed to be doing. So I think that the flexible element of and working different hours it's a great offering, a brilliant offering.
Yeah, and I guess, some jobs we know it's not always possible for that, but I think certainly, absolutely. Richard, you touched on it with your benefits, think about what people are really valuing and, how has that really changed in the last 12 months? I think people have valued that flexibility more than ever as we've suddenly found ourselves either homeschooling or caring for people or, with 2 people trying to work from the same space in one household, we're all having to kind of muscle around each other a little bit. So I think flexibility is really important. I'm conscious we're almost at 12:30, and I didn't want to, are there any key points that I haven't asked questions on, or if any of the people in our webinar today have said, I wish they'd bring this up, now is your chance to put that last question in, because we are going to be doing the last questions any second kind of now. I just want to ask perhaps one question to you both, and again, you touched on it a little bit in your presentation, Richard, and I'm sure you'll have seen it in recruitment as well, is people making that shift perhaps from more traditional private sector or public sector roles moving into the third sector. Now, there can be quite different organisations culturally, and I just wonder what would be the tips and advice for anyone that's in that situation in terms of perhaps trying to make that shift, and how would you perhaps encourage them to really understand what working in the social enterprise and broader third sector really feels like before they make the move, and then kind of go, oh, or they could make the move and go, God, this is brilliant, but how do they get a better understanding of it? Jane, and then Richard, and then just in terms of, I'll come back to you for any final comments, and I'm just checking the Q&A before bringing it to a close.
I would say that, you know, follow companies you're interested in, look at things that float your boat. So if you wanted to make that change, it's normally because you have an interest in something, or you're looking to give something back. It's a gut feeling, as opposed to thinking, what you financially need or something like that. It's much more emotional, than that. So follow the companies, connect with people. If you can have a conversation with them, online or not, to get a general understanding. If you want to volunteer with them, volunteer. There's normally people always looking to do something like that, but I think it's the same as anything. You never really know until you're in it. I will say something really briefly. If you're wanting to apply for something like that, for me, if I receive a letter, a cover letter that basically says, this is absolutely for me, and show some absolutely genuine enthusiasm about what you like about the company, why you think you could do it, why your skills are transferable, etc., that goes a really, really long way to making it worthwhile.
Absolutely. Richard?
Yep, it's similar to what Jane said. It's research. It's like any career move. It's not any different to any switching. Organisations all have their own individual cultures. We could say that the third sector is generally this way, but even within that, you'll find organisational cultures that are different. So it's important that you find out about that organisation, follow their social media, as Jane said, speak to people who work for that company, possibly volunteer, that kind of stuff. It is essentially what you would do with any career move. Research it, find out about the organisation, find out, see if you can speak to people who work there, and if possible, volunteer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that going in and finding out firsthand is really important. And I'm conscious someone has just asked whether the webinar is available for viewing, and the answer is yes. So I've put some notes just in the chat about that. So we do share them afterwards, and they're on our Vimeo channel, and you'll see links in social media. And then I guess just because this is how a job interview would kind of finish, I always think we're often asked, what is the one question, or what do you have any questions for your panelists? And I actually think this can be a really interesting way to get an insight, I think, sometimes into an organisation, but also to get them to really understand what it is that you understand about a job. So, I think sometimes people, having done interview panels, they ask questions, you think, well, that was in the information pack, and straight away you kind of think, I didn't read all the details. So you make a note. So what are the questions that you would offer as kind of guides if people are coming to interview? What are the kind of things that you would encourage people to pick up on, just as that last end of interview kind of thing? And that will be our end of panel discussion as our kind of last question. Any thoughts?
The really obvious one is career development that we spoke about. How are we going to work together to make this company better? That kind of stuff. That's the obvious the obvious one, but it's beneficial to everybody. rather than focusing on your particular needs. If you're doing an interview, something that's beneficial to everybody to help develop you so that you can help the organisation.
Mm-hmm.
That's the obvious one to me.
Yeah, and I guess shows that you want to grow within the organisation as well as the organisation grow. Jane, any just thoughts for you in terms of those kind of final questions?
When do I start? So you could always say, you know, I think we've covered everything. You know, I've really enjoyed talking about the company, so on and so forth. Is there anything else that, you know, I need to tell you about myself, or anything else I need to know? But pretty much what Richard said. But yeah, apart from when do I start is always a good one.
Do you know, you reminded me actually of an interview I once went to, and I think my last question, I kind of said, so what's the niggling question that you all have that's in your heads about why you wouldn't want me to have the job? Because this is my chance to answer that niggling question, but only if you ask it. And they all sat there a bit nervous, thinking like, can we ask? Can we ask? Because you know that you know that if you've been on an interview panel, you kind of think, oh, they could do it, but I wasn't quite sure they answered this, or I wasn't sure. So always kind of, I've always done the kind of, what's the bit that's still niggling you about why you wouldn't want to give me this job straight away? So you've got that chance to answer the niggling question by asking what it is. But you have to be comfortable in the interview to do that, because not everybody likes being put on the spot. So you have to work out whether you think your panel are up for being challenged, because that could go against you.
Clearly you're doing quite a lot of body language analysis in your interviews.
Well, I think you have to, don't you? You
Yeah.
have to. You have to. So yeah, I wouldn't ask that at all things I ever went for, but I would ask that at some if I thought I was in with the good chance, but I could see that someone just, you could read the doubt in someone's mind. I'd ask them what the doubt was, because once you've left the room, you've never got a chance to set that right. Mm-hmm. But that's a tough question to ask, so I wouldn't necessarily advise it for all instances. Richard and Jane are probably sitting there thinking, oh my God, I would never want to be asked that. Terrible advice.
It's all right. I've just taken a mental note. Richard, we'll talk later.
Can I just say thank you both? I mean, there are so many opportunities. I think we've really shown that, you know, the slides, we've got a sector that is still recruiting. I thought it was encouraging seeing the notes about recovery, but I know we've got challenges in our sector. We've touched on the pay one, it's always the obvious one, but actually working in the third sector can be incredibly rewarding. It really does have that feel-good factor that you've made a difference. And for me, I think I'd find the step into another culture quite difficult at times. So I think, you know, really try and understand that in terms of, if you're looking for jobs and careers in our sector, pick up the phone to people, organisations you like, people in job roles that you're going for. We're incredibly open, and you've heard that support, I think, there from both AAI and from Richard at GoodMoves today. So there's lots of support to help you out there. And if you are currently looking for roles, good luck. And if you're recruiting, I hope you find the right person and pick up on all the support out there. And thank you for joining our session today. And yeah, great discussion. So thank you, everyone. And thank you particularly to our panelists. It's been a great session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.